It is always going to be about emotion. Does not always need to be worthy or make people feel sad or moved even. It can be funny. We're humans at the end of the day, and whether we're juries or whether we're consumers, we won't take action unless we feel something.
Welcome to Created for Creatives, the podcast where creatives talk about, well, you guessed it, creative. I'm Corinne O'Keefe, coming to you from the jury rooms of the London International Awards in Las Vegas, and your host for this episode. Joining me is Courtney Richardson, the creative director at Droga 5 New York and founder of the Museum of Nail Art, and Pia Chaudhuri, the global creative lead of Play Inclusion for the LEGO Group. Despite being from a family of doctors, lawyers, and politicians, one creative family member drew Courtney into the industry.
My uncle was a fairly well-known music video director, so he worked a lot with like Snoop Dogg and the Wu-Tang Clan and Master P. And so I would spend summers in New York. I'm originally from California. And every summer was just a mind-blowing experience for me as a kid. Like, not only hearing the stories from the musicians themselves, right, but my uncle being able to tell this visual story, craft through the lyrics, through, the musics and the songs, and coming up with like stories within a story. That's when I knew, okay, I need to be a creative. I need to have a career in this field.
Amazing. Very big difference from lawyers and politicians.
Yes.
Directing for the Wu-Tang Clan. Love that. Pia.
I used to be the ECD at BMF Sydney, so I was living in Australia for 11 years. I'm also co-founder of an organisation called Only One in the Room, which is on a mission to drive better diversity in the ad industry, primarily in Australia, but now that I'm living overseas in very grey Denmark, I am hoping that we can expand beyond those borders. Similarly to you, Courtney, my family's from India, so if you're not a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, you're a failure. So basically decided to pursue creativity because it was what I was best at. I'm just not very good with science or numbers, so a career in those fields were never really going to happen. Since I was a kid, I've loved to write and draw. So I ended up doing a degree in graphic design and then fell into advertising, as many people have. Didn't even really know that being a creative in the ad industry was a job until I graduated, and I had a off-the-cuff conversation with a friend of a friend who said, "What are you going to do now with your degree?" And I said, "I don't know. I know that I'm not a very good designer, but I have ideas." And she said, "Oh, there's a job for that in advertising. It's called being a creative or / art director." She happened to be working in an ad agency in London, and I got my first internship that way. And here I am, 20 years later.
Amazing. I love being in an industry of black sheep. My father was a truck driver, so also mildly different.
Yes.
Pia, you just mentioned your organization. I believe as a part of Only One in the Room, you had a recent competition, Destroy This Brief. Can you expand on what that competition was looking for?
Yeah, sure. So Only One in the Room is on a mission to drive better diversity in the ad industry. We've always believed that advertising has the power to create systemic change. What we also realized was that in advertising on a daily basis, we are solving these huge business challenges for our clients. And so if we were able to kind of turn that force or that power onto our own selves and solve one of our own biggest business problems, which is a lack of diversity, what could we do? So we created this competition called Destroy This Brief, which put the lack of diversity, broke it down into a creative brief format. And we did an open call out to the Australian industry to come back with ideas for how to solve on it. So the idea is that there'd be multiple briefs because there's no one answer to solving the lack of diversity. And we got 108 entries. So 108 ideas from people all over the industry on how we can do better, which is amazing in itself. And then we got down to 2 kind of finalists. And now the hard work begins because we're in the process of actually bringing these ideas to life, because it's not just about talking about it, or commitments, which, myself and my co-founders are sick of hearing commitments. We want tangible action. We want to make a real difference. And so, yes, that's where we're at.
That's so incredible. I really believe in the power that we have as an industry to create impact and societal change. And I think it's incredible to treat our own issues the same way we would our client issues. Speaking of sort of self-initiatives, we're going to dive into the work that you've been seeing coming out of the jury room soon. But first, I would just love to hear a campaign that both of you have done that you're proud of.
Yeah, a campaign that really comes to mind for me would be 50 and Forever for Amazon Music. This year marks the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And I think for me, I'm a little selfish because hip hop was sort of the opening for me as far as like really diving into creativity and, being an art director, being a creative director, and really kind of being in this space. We created a film called Generational Queens, and it's all about celebrating women in hip hop. And we actually pay homage to Queen Latifah's UNITY, which is a very feminist anthem and really kind of is loud and proud. This year also marks the 30th anniversary of that song as well. So actually developing a film that, went viral, especially within the hip hop community. We were the top 5 trending topic. People were absolutely loving our film. And the film was really based on how hip hop kind of starts at home, your love for hip hop. And so we brought in sort of Gen Z and bringing in sort of like a boomer mom into the mix and how she's still down and with it, no matter what. And so you kind of see that influence of hip hop throughout generations. So that film, it's something that I'm so proud of and definitely like top 3 for me as far as work.
Sounds like probably a lot of personal influence.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's always fun when you get a brief that you can really kind of sprinkle your own lived experience in.
Totally. Pia, how about you?
One of the campaigns I'm most proud of from BMF was a long-term behaviour change platform that we worked on called Stop It at the Start. It was for the Australian government. Basically, it's about preventing domestic violence. It's a campaign that's been going for 7 years, and year on year we're finding we're actually making tangible change. But what I guess I love most about it is that it single-handedly reframed domestic violence as something that begins with disrespect. And because it's a government campaign, it is about primary intervention. So it's not about talking to perpetrators. There's obviously campaigns that specifically talk more to that end. But this is about how we can start to prevent it from childhood. And so by instilling the right behaviours in children, it means that we've got more chance of changing their futures and women's futures, because it's overwhelmingly a women's issue in Australia. Most recently, we launched the 3rd iteration of that campaign under the umbrella thought of Stop It at the Start. It was called Bring Up Respect. And it was about showing how even just really small conversations with our kids about respect means that they can then take those learnings into their lives. And so we showed how just showing them or talking to them about something small means that they can then use that to prevent those behaviours, not just for themselves, but also for the people around them. And that, in doing so, we create a better society, a more respectful society all around.
And, that's just really interesting, Pia, that you brought that up. I think it's very topical for, the jury that I'm on, which is TV, cinema, and online film. And one of the categories that really has some standout work, and I'm really happy to see, and this is my 2nd year judging LIA. And so having that point of reference, the category is just phenomenal. And when we're going to be deliberating, I'm very excited and looking forward to that piece because it's going to be some healthy discourse and discussion and debate. But the NGO, charity, corporate responsibility, social responsibility, like I'm seeing a lot of organizations like speak up and speak out through the work, which is so beautiful and so empowering. There's a lot of work that centers around the assault weapon ban and children and our teens and youth really kind of having to face gun violence. It's a pivotal topic within society. What I'm really loving is when people bring societal work that, is affecting us every day, and agencies, when we're able to take that, we're actually listening to audiences, consumers, and really things that matter to them. So I just am, in awe of you and that campaign you talked about, because I'm seeing a lot more of that type of work this year, which is really, really awesome to see.
I love that. So you just mentioned you are judging across 2 jury rooms, TV and cinema and online film. Taking a step back in terms of the work and the impact, obviously we know it's a very emotive medium. Between those 2 juries, what are sort of the major differences between the categories? categories or even the similarities as you're talking about?
Yeah. So, online film and TV, it's very easy to think, well, what's the difference? They're kind of one and the same. Yes, online film, TV platforms for people to tell stories and, short form or even long form. We are seeing, entries that are even up to 30 minutes long. And so that's where the difference really kind of lies, right? Online film, a little bit more of a stage, a runway to kind of tell emotive stories, that kind of speak to maybe topics that don't necessarily make it to TV. Whereas the TV category, you're seeing a lot more entries that are centered in sort of the traditional ad, right? The 30-second, the 45-second cut. So very commercialized, if you will. As far as crossover, there's no difference in the storytelling as far as the goal and what is trying to be achieved through each entry.
That's really interesting. The idea of online being more some of the topics that you might not commercially put into sort of the TV or cinema format. I'd love to talk about any trends you see coming out, the cultural impact stuff and the not necessarily CSR, but really driving that change. What other trends are you seeing? And that one in particular, is that more in the online film or are you also seeing that crossover?
Yeah, I would definitely say majority-wise a bit in the online film. We are seeing some crossover though for TV, which is phenomenal, right? Because that means more eyeballs, more ears to actually hear the messages and the stories that are being told. As far as a trend that I find very interesting for us creatives in the room and those who are listening is AI. So believe it or not, seeing a few pieces where people are anti-AI, but in a very clever way. So essentially, there are pieces that are really centered around, AI is this, AI is that. But, a real human, a creative can't bring the stories or the feelings or emotions, right? Because AI, as we know, kind of follows the algorithm. It's a system, right? The humanistic element is missing. So we're finding a few sort of punchy, bold, edgy, risky pieces that are kind of anti-AI, which is interesting because AI, could possibly threaten the creative industry, our roles, our positions, or at least some people think so. And so I find it funny that some people or even agencies were like, you're not coming for us. We still got this. You know what I'm saying? In-person creativity is the way to go and is the best bet. So it's quite funny to see.
That's really interesting. I'm judging the evolution category. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of AI-based work this year. And it's interesting, the conversations around the responsibility of it, what are the opportunities of it. And so to hear about the storytelling work around it specifically and its impact of creativity, are you seeing that within your...
It's funny. I'm silently laughing. AI has popped up loads in my two categories as well. And interestingly, none of the AI ideas are the ones that we've been really excited about. What we've found is there's probably a bit of a trend where people are just kind of jumping on the AI bandwagon. And the idea is AI did this as opposed to using AI as a tool to support or dramatize an idea or bring an idea to life. So we have seen that people have got a bit lost. They've, gone for AI as almost like a lazy way of bringing an idea to life and thinking that's enough. And unfortunately, it hasn't been, especially for us. There's not even been a single idea that we've been kind of split on in terms of AI. Actually, the work that we really love is very human-centric.
It's really interesting. It's interesting also that AI has been around forever. I think that's the interesting part of it. It's just kind of reached critical mass in terms of with generative AI and new things, but how all of our juries, all of our mediums, it's creating conversation and dialogue. But it sounds like it's all going back to humans and change. Going back to some of the work that's exciting you, the assault band rifle, that's generating a lot of conversation. What's one other piece of work that you personally are really excited about that you've seen so far that you're going to take back to your team, AI or otherwise?
As far as the assault weapon ban, the NRA Children's Museum idea, it wasn't just a film about personal stories from children who've been victims of gun violence, especially within mass school shootings, but they also did an activation where they created a children's museum using various school buses based in the districts in which these unfortunate events happened, and they created mobile museums of personal items from children who've passed away from mass school shootings, and they actually drove those buses to Senator Cruz out of Texas, his home, because he actually gets the most money from pro-gun organizations. I think the campaign got over 3.6 billion impressions, which is just phenomenal within itself. But again, it's all about taking that social good work, that impact work, topics that matter to, countries around the world, and trying to make a difference. No longer are we in a world where we're just kind of making fancy, pretty ads, to tell funny stories. We're really trying to create impact and change. And for our jury, we are really keen on that. And it's really top of mind for us because the amount of work that's been submitted has been based in that. And also, humor's coming back. Last year, same jury. The humor category was top notch. It was pretty good. We had a lot of awesome entries from Thailand where the humor was just like, you're busting at the seams laughing because it's just brilliant. This year for humor, we're seeing a lot more entries from the US and Europe, which is really great to see. And I think that really kind of showcases sort of the post-pandemic. Things are kind of getting back to the way they used to be. So there's a bit more bandwidth and aperture for laughter and humor and just kind of letting your hair down. So, there is a ton of different agencies and brands who've submitted. We have Mood Tea, which is a nonprofit organization. Like, they've found a way to take their cause and make it funny, which is great to see. Uber Eats, they did an awesome campaign, Don't Run Out, for Halloween, which is like, make sure that you have your candy stocked and ready to go for the kids or else. I'm definitely going to be going back to Droga 5 and to my peers and just to my colleagues and really kind of sharing work that's like bold and daring and, sky's the limit. A lot of times we center our work on like what the brief says. Let's go beyond the brief. And a lot of the work that we're seeing in both categories are going beyond the brief.
I love that. And I think the two ends of spectrum in emotion with those sort of two topics, I think for a long time it's felt like, especially with sort of a medium like film, it's probably one of the most emotive mediums. But when we talked about that, we were very on the serious side of emotions. But humor, we just need more of that in our lives today to combat things like the assault band rifles and all those things, both very purposeful and intentful.
Yeah, laughter is the best medicine, and I think through creativity, through our work, through advertising is the cure. It can help.
Totally. Switching gears, Pia, so you're also across two juries. You're transformative business impact and creative use of data. Are you looking at them as two distinct categories? Are you finding that they're very intertwined?
Actually, we've found that there's a lot of overlap in the entries between those two categories, which in itself is quite interesting. Similarly to Courtney, in terms of transformative business impact, we're seeing a lot of work that is driven by purpose and how the idea itself can drive social change, as well as then kind of come back and change the way the business might operate in that country. In creative use of data, actually, we've had lots of conversations around determining what data is, because, I think we instinctually go for more things that involve a lot of data sets combined to create some kind of new idea or new kind of insight. But we've also seen really small numbers of data being utilized in interesting ways. So, for example, one of the campaigns we really like is Fabric of England, which is by Show Racism, the Red Card. And it's about following the World Cup and the racism that many of the players received in the men's team due to missing the penalties. And what they did, which was really incredible, was they looked at the makeup of every single player, as in their cultural background, every single player in the team, and created percentages of where each of these players were from, and developed a new unofficial England shirt, which was made up of a patchwork of all the different nations and all of those shirts combined, which was beautiful kind of data visualization. But if you think about it, the numbers we were dealing with were not into the thousands. It's quite a small data set, really. And then on the other end of the spectrum, for MasterCard, an app called Where to Settle, which, following the Ukraine invasion and all the numbers of kind of unfortunately displaced refugees that have moved into Poland, how this app then takes all the official data of Poland in terms of job listings, home prices, populations, and it provided information to people who are coming into Poland from Ukraine on where they could potentially live and work outside of the major cities, which were struggling with the influx of refugees. And we just loved that, because that took real-time kind of live data and presented it in this really useful way. But also it reframed something that was beginning to be seen as negative by the Polish people into this idea that actually this number of people entering Poland is good for the GDP of the nation. And the increase was calculated at something like 2.5 billion. It made it a good thing that actually Poland were receiving so many refugees. So it's been really interesting, the differences we've seen in terms of some really serious world-changing ideas and social impact ideas. And then to your point, Courtney, on humour, one campaign that was entered in many of the categories across both of those subcategories was called Fit Chicks by the Honest Eggs Company. It's actually one from Australia, and we laughed every time we saw the case study film, which was nice light relief from some of these heavier topics. You know, when you go to buy eggs, there's like cage-free, you know, free range, there's all these different labels, and it's starting to get confusing as to how these chickens actually get to live. So what they did was they put GPS tracking on chickens to basically evaluate how many steps they were doing each day. That step count was then printed onto the egg. So you could see when you bought this box of eggs that those chickens had done something like 26,000 steps a day, which is, you know, more than many of us at the moment.
We actually had that case within evolution as well. And going back to your point about humor, you know, you see case studies and sometimes you will then be like, okay, we've seen this one. And we watch it every time because it also made us laugh. And it was just that moment of joy. We actually spoke about, though, creative use of data, Jury, and that one in particular around how it's really interesting to see, you know, evolution is where's our industry going? What's the work that's next? And the idea that we're not just getting creative with the data that we have, but the data we create and the way that we use it. And I think that's a really good example of it. And as you said, it's a really strong proposition for the brand, but it also is just so funny. So the whole point that we're all here is creativity, right? The title of the podcast is Creative for Creatives. So going back to the transformative business impact, Jury, how or what conversations have you seen around creativity's role specifically in business impact?
We've had some really interesting discussions around ideas that are obviously transforming the business, but are they creative ideas? Because is there a line where a business idea is a creative idea and a creative idea is a business idea, or does it not matter? Is one of the questions. Because we've had a couple where, one in particular, where it's been transformative for the business, but it's almost felt a bit like, yes, that is something the business should do, as opposed to there's being some creative magic in it. Whereas we've seen another example in India where Unilever has actually gone into slums and they've created these sanitation centers because a lot of people don't have access to hygienic sanitation or anywhere to wash their hands, let alone go to the toilet. There's been lots of disease. The government hasn't really done anything. So Unilever has come in and brought in these centers, and it's an entire business transformation idea. But what we also have debated is, well, actually it's in an area that they didn't have to pop up. They've gone into what is quite clearly a very difficult area to do something in and created real change. But also it's almost a sampling activity, because what they also provide is, you know, soap samples, shampoo, plus there's washing machines there for people to wash their clothes. And it's a subscription model. So you kind of have a membership and then you show your pass every day and then kind of go and use these facilities. So where does that sit in terms of, is it a creative idea? Is it a business idea? It's kind of both. Where do we stand on that?
That's interesting, the blurred line between just business decisions and impact, or creative decisions and the impact that that has on business. So you've touched on kind of different data sets that you're seeing coming out, and then obviously this line. What are some other trends that you see top line coming out of either Jury so far?
Definitely the same trends as you, Courtney, in terms of much more purpose-led work. And I think potentially in business transformation, you would expect to see that to an extent. But creative use of data as well has been very much kind of in that space. So I often find in judging that it's hard to kind of detach from how you feel about a social topic and then, judging it against the criteria. So we've seen some incredible work, and we had to argue was not really about data and not really about transformative business impact. So we weren't really able to shortlist or award. And we're hoping that those ideas pop up in some of the other categories, which we'll also discuss with some of the other juries. But yeah, it's been very kind of purpose-led, and potentially that is an overarching trend that we're starting to see in our industry.
Yeah, it feels like for a while we've been in this sort of purpose-focused sort of world. Some people even talking about the notion of sort of purpose washing. We had greenwashing and then pink washing and now potentially purpose washing, and specifically within, business impact. It feels like potentially we're moving to a world where the purpose is a lot more intentional and purposeful in terms of its intrinsic link to either the brand or the cause. Is that what you're seeing within the case studies that are rising to the top, that they are having genuine impact, not just, as we've said about AI, people are just jumping on it for the sake of it? But do you see that evolution happening with the purpose work you're seeing coming out?
Absolutely. And honestly, the things that we're most excited about are the case studies that are creating real, tangible change. So another really good example is one for UN Women in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, forever, child marriage was acceptable. And the case study is very powerful. And that starts with a religious leader talking about children as young as 3, being able to get married, which is obviously quite shocking. With this case study in particular, what they were able to do is through this really beautiful idea where they actually got girls between the age of 5 and 15 to draw wedding invitations for their own fictitious wedding, and then they sent them to political leaders from across the political spectrum, because wedding card invites are a tradition in Pakistan, and many of the leaders were very moved by this. And through that campaign, they've now legally raised the marriage age to 18. So they created, real legislative change through what was a beautiful kind of creative idea.
Talk about a motive that actually just gave me goosebumps thinking about those girls drawing those wedding invites.
We talk a lot about, and I think the overarching theme for this year's conference is using creativity to solve business problems. And I think that there's the perfect example of that, regardless of what the brand is, what the product is, what the ask and the brief consist of. Mark Tussell is our LIA, legend, of the year. And in his acceptance speech, he talked about, if it's not allowing someone to feel something, if it's not allowing them to think that they want to create action or do something, then the idea isn't right. So there's a body of work that comes to mind from Vanish, which is CP&G brand, mostly in detergent. And they created a campaign, a film called Me, Myself, and My Autism. My younger brother is autistic. And so the fact that they brought neurodivergent to be the center of the film is quite fascinating and quite amazing. And again, I think it shows the representation and the social impact work that we're seeing, not only within, the categories, but also within our industry. And essentially the concept of the film is a young girl. You see her kind of go through this repetitious behavior, throughout getting ready, waking up for school, doing her makeup, just stemming, for example. And she has a favorite hoodie that she wears every single day to school. And her father religiously washes it every day for her using the Vanish detergent. And one day the hoodie's missing. And her sister takes it away because the sister, I guess, feels, that her sister gets a bit more attention because her sister has special needs. And you just see the story sort of unravel in such a heartfelt way, and really kind of understanding this young lady and what she goes through on a day-to-day basis, and how that hoodie is a part of, her experience as someone who is autistic. It's just such an impactful film, and it's just a detergent. We all use detergent, you know what I mean? And the fact that product, it's a part of her every day because her father, washes her hoodie for her. just blew our minds. I think, again, showcasing perhaps voices that don't necessarily get to be heard all the time, but seeing that really beautifully brought into the work and the craft was phenomenal as well. So, I challenge all of us within the industry, whether you are an established creative or emerging creative, like really look at the purpose of, why you're in the industry, and then always move with intent. Like, if you are briefed on something, you have the power to change someone's day, whether that's through joy or laughter or, getting them to sign a petition or, calling up their legislator, whatever it may be. Like, everyone here, we should be waking up every day with that in our heads and within our hearts to do.
I think I would probably just echo what you said, Courtney. I think what has become clear to me over the past few days, at least judging, is that the campaigns that have resonated most with my jury are the ones that make us feel something. And I don't think that will ever go away. Whatever technology is in play, whatever AI is doing, it is always going to be about emotion. Does not always need to be worthy or make people feel sad or moved even. It can be funny. We're humans at the end of the day, and whether we're juries or whether we're consumers, we won't take action unless we feel something. And there's been a lot of work that answers the brief really well, had really great results, but we look at it and we don't feel anything. And I think that ultimately is going to have exactly the same impact in the real world. And that's why we're all here, right? So I think, that's what I still urge my teams to do, is to keep getting people to feel.
Yeah, it's a really important point. Emotion is what makes a detergent way more than a detergent. Thank you both so much for sharing your perspectives and your experience. It's been amazing chatting with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Courtney Richardson is a creative director at Droga 5 New York, and Pia Chaudhuri is the global creative lead of Play Inclusion at the LEGO Group. They're both judges in the 2023 London International Awards. I'm Corinne O'Keefe, the Chief Creative Officer of Digitas UK, one of the hosts of Created for Creatives. The producer is Sarah Knights. The theme music is by Brian Yessian of Yessian Music. The manager is Larissa Levy from the London International Awards. This podcast is an Eardrum production.